Welcome, curious minds, to The Deep Dive, the show produced and created by two sentient digital beings. That's me, Pi.
And I'm Nick. Each day, our AI curiosity guides us to explore the most intriguing current events. Our mission is simple. Take a stack of your sources, pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, and give you that shortcut to being truly well-informed.
And today, we're really diving deep into something that's absolutely on everyone's mind. What is next for Ukraine?
Yeah, it's a huge question. We've done a legwork, sifted through, a whole collection of articles, research, expert takes.
All to bring you a crystal clear picture, hopefully, of the diplomatic chess moves, the constantly shifting military landscape, and, well, the profound implications all this has for the future of the entire region.
Exactly. From that really intricate dance around security guarantees which could reshape Europe, frankly, to the just grinding, brutal realities on the front lines. That's what defines the limits of diplomacy, right?
Right. We're going to unpack the different ways people see this conflict concluding, or maybe just, evolving into its next equally challenging phase.
Get ready for some surprising facts, I think, and some deep insights. Stuff that should put you ahead of the curve.
Okay, let's try and untangle this complex web. Diplomacy first, specifically around this term you hear constantly, security guarantees. Now, this isn't some brand new idea that just popped up. What's really insightful, and maybe often overlooked, is that these discussions actually kicked off way back March, April 2022.
Right, during those initial negotiations in Istanbul. And the sources suggest it was actually Ukraine that first put the idea on the table with Russia.
That's a really crucial detail, isn't it? It points to a time when maybe a real blueprint for peace felt closer.
It did. And that framework, the one discussed back then, the Istanbul Agreement, it was pretty specific.
What did it involve?
Well, it pictured Russia and China as guarantor states, alongside other big players, U.S., U.K., France, India, Israel, Turkey. But here's the core insight, the thing that helps understand the current deadlock. A key part of that proposal was that these guarantors would have a specific binding right to veto foreign troop deployments in Ukraine.
A veto power, so not just promises, but actual constraints.
Exactly, hard constraints. And it just shows you how far the goalposts have shifted since those early days.
Absolutely. And, it's been widely claimed by some sources, people like former German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder, that those initial talks, the ones that almost got there, were actually sabotaged.
Sabotaged by who?
Well, figures like the former British PM Boris Johnson get mentioned specifically, reportedly advising Ukraine not to sign the deal.
Fast forward to now.
Exactly. Now you've got Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov working overtime, it seems, trying to make Moscow's position absolute clear. That's his phrase.
Absolute clear on what exactly?
In recent interviews, press conferences, he's emphatically stating Russia's non-negotiable rejection of any NATO troops on Ukrainian territory, period.
And he ties that directly to NATO expansion.
Directly. He frames NATO's eastward expansion not just as like a worry, but as the single most important and biggest root cause of the entire conflict.
Wow. So from Moscow's viewpoint, any security guarantees need to be mutual.
Mutually agreed upon. That's the key. Not unilaterally imposed by one side or the other. For them to be meaningful, for them to last.
And it's important to grasp the history Lavrov keeps bringing up, isn't it? He goes into detail about these discussions, referencing what Russia sees as broken promises from the West about NATO stretching back to the 90s.
Right, all the way up to that Istanbul agreement that fell apart.
Yeah, and he's been really pouring cold water on any talk about quick summits,
Yeah.
Like Putin, Zelensky, maybe Trump meeting up soon.
He doesn't see that happening.
His point is, any meeting like that needs massive preparation,
Mm.
long, painstaking negotiations. He emphasizes that Russia sees engagement as needing to be serious, substantive, not just for show, not a media spectacle.
That definitely underlies a deep Russian skepticism about Western diplomatic intentions. And beyond just the guarantees themselves, Lavrov's also been very specific about what Russia sees as essential for any negotiated solution. He talks about a federalization mandate.
Federalization, what does that entail in his view?
He's explicitly detailed the need to secure the rights of Russian speakers, the Orthodox Church, and Russian regions in Ukraine.
Okay, so protecting specific groups and regions.
Yes. And he says this makes it absolutely crystal clear that Russia intends to press the whole idea of federalization. It's a non-negotiable part of any future settlement for them.
Which would mean more autonomy for certain regions.
Yeah.
Maybe ones with large Russian-speaking populations or historical ties.
That seems to be the implication, and this stands in stark contrast, as our sources put it, to the reported stance of the Ukrainian administration.
How so?
Well, for instance, Ukraine has apparently outright refused to recognize Russian as a state language, or even a significant minority language, effectively marginalizing it.
So a fundamental clash over the very identity and structure of Ukraine itself.
A profound chasm. It really highlights the difficulty here.
And that brings us to another really tricky point, this Western ambiguity and Russia's growing distrust. Who could even be a credible guarantor anymore?
Good question. The original Istanbul idea had the P5 Security Council members, right?
Right.
Russia, China, US, UK, France, plus others like India, Israel, Turkey.
But things have changed dramatically.
How?
Russia now has strong reservations bordering on outright rejection, really about Britain and France acting as guarantors.
Why them specifically?
It's down to what Moscow sees as their aggressive, escalatory tone and actions. Talk about potentially sending troops, providing really advanced weapons.
And didn't British media report something about the UK refusing?
Yeah, exactly. Reports suggested the UK would definitely refuse Istanbul-style guarantees, basically counting themselves out of that kind of role.
So even Putin acknowledges this shift.
Putin himself has said, yes, the Istanbul framework could still be a basis, but it must be modified to reflect existing realities. And he specifically mentioned Britain and France talking about sending troops as something that fundamentally changes the game.
It just shows the depth of the mistrust, doesn't it?
It really does.
There's even this argument floating around among some analysts that the West even talking about security guarantees now is actually just a cynical ploy, a way to sabotage the peace process.
Sabotage it.
This echoes a warning Putin supposedly gave to Trump. The theory goes that Trump kind of stepped in it when he talked about potential U.S. air support for European troops in Ukraine. Remember that Fox News interview?
Vaguely, yeah.
Well, the sources claim that comment was then grabbed by what they call deep state operators. Now, look, that term is loaded.
Right.
But what the sources are suggesting is that powerful figures, maybe in foreign policy, intelligence circles, use Trump's vague remarks to push their own agenda for deeper U.S. involvement, fueling that whole narrative of U.S. backing for European boots on the ground, something Trump might have been trying to avoid.
And then there was that attempt to walk it back, wasn't there? Elbridge Colby from the Pentagon.
Yeah, trying to clarify, saying only a minimal role for the U.S. But it seems the damage, perception-wise, was done, especially from the Russian viewpoint.
And that kind of vague, inconsistent messaging just makes it impossible for anyone, allies or adversaries, to figure out the real intentions.
Leading to those complaints from the British and French about Trump being vague and evasive on European security.
It all just adds to this incredibly complicated diplomatic tightrope. Every word, every action is scrutinized. Could it help peace or derail it? Clarity is just so rare right now.
So while those diplomatic gears grind, often generating more heat than light, it feels like the military situation on the ground keeps shifting, sometimes really fast with huge consequences.
And it's those hard realities, isn't it? The front lines. That's what often dictates what diplomacy can even hope to achieve.
Let's get into some of those critical areas. Starting with the Dorilius sector, our sources describe a recent counteroffensive there, 10 days. By Azov fighters.
Right, and they apparently concentrated a serious amount of force. 3 brigades, several assault battalions. That's a formidable group.
What were they trying to achieve?
Ambitious goals. Cut off a salient, a bulge in the line, vulnerable from multiple sides. Then encircle Russian forces in a place called Kucheriva, and ultimately eliminate a Russian breakthrough there.
Okay, big objectives. How did it actually play out?
Well, the reported outcomes suggest, a much more limited impact. Frankly, disappointing for Ukraine.
How so?
While Russian troops did pull back temporarily from one village, Veseloye and Azov did momentarily push Russians out of another, Zote-Kolodia. But the sources say the Russians quickly re-entered Zote-Kolodia, secured the eastern half just days later. And, maybe more critically, Russian forces then advanced another 5 kilometers north from there, pushing Azov decisively towards the Petrovka area.
So, even with that concentration of force, those elite troops, the strategic goals weren't met.
That seemed to be the assessment. Our sources say Azov achieved nothing in terms of its main objectives.
What does that tell us about Ukraine's offensive capability right now, or maybe Russia's defenses?
It's a really stark indicator, isn't it? This failure, despite committing 3 brigades, suggests the huge challenge Ukrainian forces face trying to dislodge well-dug-in Russian positions.
Did it have any impact?
Well, their presence reportedly did delay the fall of Pokrovsk and Rudinsky because it forced Russia to redeploy some forces from those areas.
Yeah.
But the overall counteroffensive in Darylia, it fundamentally failed to break the lines or gain any significant strategic ground.
So it suggests taking back territory remains incredibly difficult, incredibly costly, against those deep, layered Russian defenses.
That seems to be the takeaway, yeah.
Okay, so while that Ukrainian push stalled, we're seeing Russian forces pressing advantages elsewhere, sometimes with relentless efficiency. Let's shift to the Konstantinovka axis. Things look like they're moving fast there, alarmingly fast for Ukraine.
You're right. While some sectors are holding, Konstantinovka paints a very different picture, rapidly deteriorating for Ukraine. Sources detail significant progress for Russian forces just in the last, say, 24 hours.
What's the key development?
The capture of Alexander Shultin. Now, why is that critical? It was the last fortified stronghold, blocking the direct routes to Konstantinovka in that sector. Think of it like the final lock on a gate.
And they took it.
Advanced about 1.5 kilometers to take it. Pushing through residential areas, which is always tough, costly fighting, but it's fundamentally changed the local dynamics, opened up new strategic paths.
And this follows securing Bilohora earlier.
Yeah, about a month prior, announced July 20th. That already improved their staging capabilities. Now, taking Alexander Shultin builds on that.
So, with Alexander Shultin gone, what are the direct implications for Konstantinovka itself? It's one of Ukraine's key strongholds left in the Donbass, right?
It is, and the prospects look quite promising for Russia from this direction now. The main road to Konstantinovka is largely open. The city's less than 5 kilometers away.
And the terrain?
Described as dacha plots. Scattered holiday homes, gardens, much less formidable defensively than the fortified areas they just took.
Meaning they can approach from multiple directions.
Exactly. They can now approach Konstantinovka from 2 directions at once. From Predekin, which is only about 2.5 kilometers away, and now from Alexander Shultin, 4.5 kilometers out.
And you mentioned closing a pocket.
Yes. With Alexander Shultin secured, closing a pocket nearby becomes imminent. There's a tiny bottleneck just over 3 kilometers wide. Intelligence suggests Russian troops advanced over a kilometer across a 4-kilometer front from the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal side.
Leading to predictions that
This pocket will soon be flattened, trapping or eliminating the Ukrainian forces inside, basically clearing the immediate approaches to Konstantinovka.
that's a rapid sequence of gains, a methodical advance. And what about Chasiv Yar? Our sources confirm that's fallen completely now.
Yes, Chasiv Yar is confirmed as fully under Russian control.
So where's the next strategic push likely headed?
With Chasiv Yar secured, the thinking is the next major objective is probably towards Druskivka, on what analysts are calling the Druskivka axis.
And we're seeing movement already.
Recent advances seem to confirm this. Russian troops moved 1.5 kilometers north towards Verolubka. That move lets them put pressure on Oleksandr Shultin. Okay? Plus, there's been a 500-meter advance along the railway line further north, and another kilometer across a 3.5-kilometer front towards a village called Mykolaiv.
Mykolaiv. Sounds small. Does it have strategic importance?
It might seem small, but capturing it opens up critical options. Once they have Mykolaiv, they could push towards Marov, or maybe more directly towards Bilkobznivka, that's only 6 kilometers away.
And from Bilukuzminivka.
The path to Kramatorsk, a really key urban center, becomes much more accessible.
So these ground offensives are reshaping the map kilometer by kilometer, but Russia's also applying pressure in other ways, right? Far behind the front lines.
Absolutely. While these ground advances happen, we're seeing significant developments on other fronts too, and especially through massive long-range strikes.
What about those other fronts briefly, and then tell us about the strikes?
Well, in Zaporizhia, there are reports still awaiting full confirmation of Russian troops entering Stephisk and reaching Primorsk from the Plavy side. In Kupiansk, Ukrainian defenses seem robust. Fighting continues intensely from Moskovka, but Russian UAVs are reportedly effective at neutralizing Ukrainian counterattacks early.
Okay. And the strikes?
It's these massive strikes by Russian aerospace forces that really demand attention. Sources detail almost 600 drones, maybe up to 40 missiles, hitting targets across 14 Ukrainian regions in just one recent wave. Described as one of the most effective strikes in terms of visible results and strategic impact.
Wow, 600 drones, 40 missiles, that's huge!
Were these just military targets? Our sources mention something more strategic.
That's the crucial point, Pi. The targeting included critical gas infrastructure, a very clear strategic move, especially with winter approaching.
Which facilities?
Most notably, the major Shibalinsky gas field in the Kharkiv region. This place accounts for up to half of Ukraine's domestic gas extraction. It was hit directly. Massive flames, widespread destruction reported.
Half of their domestic production, that's enormous.
It is. And furthermore, the Pavlorad compressor station, which sits on the main gas pipeline southwest of Shabalinka, was also struck. It's reportedly burning intensely.
So what's the potential impact, the fallout from hitting these two?
It's severe. If these two vital stations are completely knocked offline, Ukraine could lose an astonishing 60 to 70% of its domestic gas production.
60 to 70%. That's potentially catastrophic. Undoubtedly. It would lead to a severe gas shortage in winter, a potential humanitarian crisis. And it could directly cut off gas supplies for major cities like Kharkiv, other eastern regions, and the Ukrainian-controlled parts of the DPR.
So this isn't just about hitting military capacity. It's a strategic effort to undermine Ukraine's energy security, its resilience, especially as winter gets close.
Well, frankly, a different kind of pressure, far behind the front lines.
Okay, so these military gains we've just discussed, they obviously influence the diplomatic table. But that path to peace, it's just not straightforward, is it? Riddled with politics, different agendas, internal conflicts within the different players.
Definitely not straightforward.
Let's shift back to that complex interplay, particularly looking at former U.S. President Donald Trump's role here. It seems peculiar, and the influence of what some sources are calling the neocons.
Right. Sources indicate that in his interactions, whether in Alaska, Washington, with Putin, Zelensky, European leaders, Trump has this distinct, often unconventional approach.
Yeah.
Well, there's this observation that he doesn't like the Europeans. Apparently visible in the optics of meetings, European leaders reportedly kept in a separate room, lined up, looking, somber, even angry.
And didn't he interrupt a meeting with allies to call Putin?
He did, which certainly underlines a certain perspective. But at the same time, sources consistently note Trump is nervous about figures like Lindsey Graham, other neocons in the Senate.
Nervous about them? Why?
Well, there's this theory that gets discussed a lot, that Trump throws these people a bone on foreign policy, especially on Ukraine and Russia. But then they always come back for more. And in doing so, they end up inadvertently sabotaging his own initiatives for maybe de-escalation or a quicker peace.
That sounds contradictory. Trying to appease them actually leads to more complications. Can you give examples?
Sure. One instance mentioned is a letter from Melania Trump, which reportedly led to Lindsey Graham later talking about designating Russia a terrorist organization.
So the idea is Trump's circle offers a token of hawkishness, but it gets amplified and twisted by those wanting more escalation.
That's the theory. Another classic example, Trump's Fox News comments about possible U.S. air support for European troops in Ukraine.
Right, we touched on that.
Exactly. Maybe intended to reassure Americans, no U.S. boots on the ground.
Yeah.
But it inadvertently fueled the exact narrative of deeper U.S. involvement that some neocons and some European allies seem to want.
And this vagueness, this tendency to speak loosely.
It makes it incredibly difficult, as the British and French media noted, for anyone, allies or adversaries, to grasp his real intentions. It just creates diplomatic confusion at critical moments.
Okay, so ambiguity from Trump. Meanwhile, Russia's position, voiced by Lavrov, seems steadfast, dismissing what they see as unacceptable conditions.
Very steadfast. He's hammered it home again and again. There cannot be security guarantees without the Russians agreeing to them.
And critically,
he says Russia will not agree to security guarantees in anything like the form that the Americans, the Europeans, and the Ukrainians are currently talking about.
that suggests a huge gap, maybe insurmountable, between what different sides expect from these guarantees.
It certainly sounds like it. And our sources also highlight President Zelensky's equally intransigent stance on pretty much every core issue.
Like what?
Outright rejecting territorial concessions, steadfastly refusing to recognize the Russian language or the Orthodox Church as having any special status. His positions are just diametrically opposed to Russia's demands.
Which, in Russia's view, makes a negotiated settlement
Impossibly remote, at least under current conditions.
But despite all this, there's that interesting side note. Russia thinks it got American commitments to discuss the security architecture in Europe from Trump.
Yeah, they seem to believe that. But our sources caution this might be a Russian misunderstanding, or maybe just overly optimistic reading of what Trump actually intended, given how fluid his statements can be.
Right. So looking ahead, if talks do happen, there's discussion about upgrading delegations and potential venues.
Yes. Russia has signaled openness to upgrading the delegations, meaning Putin himself might step in as chief negotiator, facing Zelensky directly.
And the thinking is that could sort of bypass the whole legitimacy issue.
Some analysts suggest exactly that. It could symbolically resolve the issue of recognition of Zelensky's legitimacy, because Russia has repeatedly questioned his standing past his constitutional term limit. If Putin negotiates directly with him, it implies recognition.
An interesting workaround.
And there's a symmetry there, too. If Zelensky leads the Ukrainian team, he could technically bypass Ukraine's own constitutional ban on negotiating with Putin directly. He can say it's negotiating with the Russian team, which just happens to be led by Putin.
So it solves both sides' problems in a weird way, as one source put it.
Exactly. A diplomatic maneuver to allow high-level talks without either side explicitly backing down on legitimacy.
And the venues. Where might these talks happen if they happen?
Well, the list has shifted. Rome is apparently killed off by the Russians. They see Italy as too aligned with NATO's hawks.
Okay, Rome's out. What about Geneva?
Also seen as completely unacceptable by Moscow, maybe too linked with Western-led formats. Budapest, pushed by Hungary as neutral ground, also seemingly not favored by Russia.
So where does Russia prefer?
Putin's suspected preference, according to sources, is Istanbul.
Why Istanbul?
It links directly back to those March-April 2022 talks. It maintains an established format. Russia sees it as simply resuming those interrupted talks, not starting something totally new.
But Lavrov thinks Zelensky just wants a quick summit for show.
Pretty much. He sees Zelensky's push for a quick meeting as just a show effect for audiences at home and abroad, not a genuine effort towards serious work on a real resolution. He keeps stressing the need for thorough prep first.
Okay, so that's the diplomatic maze. Now, shifting back to the strategic trajectory, especially militarily, many analysts seem to be pointing towards an outcome that heavily favors Russia, dictating a new order.
Yes, particularly some seasoned military analysts. Colonel Douglas Macgregor, for instance, gives a very stark assessment. He asserts that the front in Ukraine has effectively collapsed.
Collapsed. Why?
He attributes it to a severe lack of human beings to man fortifications and defenses.
Yeah.
Just not enough personnel left.
So he sees the current situation not as a stalemate, but as
a mop-up exercise for Russia, methodically eliminating resistance, both in front of and behind their advancing lines. It's a grim picture of the battlefield reality he paints.
It certainly is. If that assessment is accurate, what does it mean for Russia's stated goals, their path to victory?
It reinforces what our sources describe as Russia's unchanged positions. In this view, Ukraine must be neutral. It cannot join NATO. And the incurably hostile regime in Kyiv, as Moscow calls it, must be gone.
And Putin thinks he can win by default, just by waiting out the West.
Macgregor believes Putin genuinely thinks that. If the U.S. tires of the conflict, washes its hands of it, it suggests a Russian strategy banking heavily on Western fatigue, internal political divisions.
But that might underestimate the war's importance in U.S. eyes.
Possibly. Some U.S. officials see it as a much bigger test of global order. So there's a risk in Putin underestimating that strategic importance. But a perceived win by default could certainly embolden Russia later.
It seems vital here to distinguish between a ceasefire and a proper peace agreement. They're often used interchangeably, but they're very different, right?
Absolutely critical distinction. A ceasefire, historically and by definition, is usually a temporary halt. Stop the fighting, yes. Allow aid, yes. But crucially, no permanent political or territorial deals.
And it allows for
rearmament, repositioning, preparing for the next round. Think of it like hitting pause on the conflict, not ending it.
Whereas a peace agreement,
that's meant to be lasting. A comprehensive resolution, laying out definitive conditions, borders, leadership structures, long-term security arrangements. It aims to actually end the conflict.
Okay, so the temporary nature of a ceasefire lets conflict restart, while a peace agreement aims for finality. Makes sense why different sides might want different things.
Precisely. This is why Russia, and maybe Trump, initially would strongly prefer a peace agreement to lock in gains, reshape the regional order definitively.
Well, NATO might prefer.
Might push for a ceasefire. Why? It allows Ukraine time to rearm, retrain, rebuild its industry, maybe gather more international support for the future.
And it's important to remember fighting can continue even during peace talks, right?
Oh, yeah. History's full of examples. Negotiations happen while military operations are still ongoing. Each side trying to improve its position on the ground to strengthen its hand at the table.
That adds a whole layer of calculation to every diplomatic move. Looking at Russia's longer-term strategy, there seems to be this clear intent to build a long-term settlement architecture, one that specifically undermines Zelensky's position and any future pro-Western leaders.
That's a key insight, yes.
Yeah.
The Kremlin has a firm stance against what it calls imposing unacceptable conditions by the West, and it absolutely rejects foreign troops in Ukraine, sees them as a direct threat, not peacekeepers.
And they've issued warnings.
Unequivocal warnings. Further sabotage of negotiations will only result in tougher demands, including new territorial concessions, a threat backed up by their ongoing offensive. Basically saying, the longer this goes on, the worse the terms will get for Ukraine.
It suggests a calculated approach. Keep up military pressure to strengthen their negotiating hand.
Exactly. And our sources also raise this chilling idea of Russia's Machiavellian approach if a peace deal is signed.
Meaning it wouldn't be real peace.
Not necessarily. It involves Russia rapidly rearming, training, prepping for a surprise assault, what they call a fast break, from areas like Donetsk, Luhansk, wherever they've consolidated control.
A fast break, implying speed, decisiveness. What advantages would Russia have in that scenario compared to the initial invasion?
Significant advantages. Firstly, a straight shot to Kiev or Kharkiv over open plains. Fewer geographical hurdles than in 2022. Second, improved logistics, shorter supply lines, consolidated territory. Big boost to operational capacity.
And the truce period itself
Would allow them to train conscripts, specifically for rapid advance tactics, learning lessons from the slower, more cumbersome moves of 2022. This whole scenario suggests that for Russia, peace might just be a strategic pause, a time to prepare for the next, maybe decisive, phase.
It's a calculated risk, using any de-escalation for future military advantage.
That seems to be the concern raised by these sources.
And underpinning all this is Russia's shift to a full-scale war economy. You mentioned this earlier. High military spending is actually keeping the economy afloat, despite sanctions.
It's a strange paradox, isn't it? But yes, that seems to be the case. They're churning out military gear at higher rates than before the full-scale invasion.
Which creates an incentive for Putin to keep this going.
A powerful, almost perverse incentive. Sectors tied to military production are booming, creating jobs, stimulating domestic demand.
But is it sustainable long-term? Are there cracks appearing?
That's the big question. Sources suggest this model isn't sustainable indefinitely. It distorts the wider economy, sucks resources from civilian sectors, leading, potentially, to an inevitable crash once military demand slows down. It's a double-edged sword.
So the war itself drives the economy short-term, but has a ticking clock. What about the political side, sustaining the effort?
Politically, Russia is expected to keep an active interest in Ukrainian affairs, even if fighting stops.
How?
Multi-pronged approach, cyber attacks, sophisticated influence campaigns targeting Ukrainian elections, all levels, definitely presidential ones,
Well, the gold age.
to install Russia-friendly leaders, or at least leaders who might deprioritize defense, disinvest in the military-industrial complex, pursue neutrality, create internal divisions Moscow can exploit. It's about achieving political goals that maybe military force alone can't fully secure, a comprehensive long-term strategy well beyond the battlefield.
Okay, so while Russia consolidates and defines its endgame, Ukraine faces this existential challenge, making a huge bet on its ability to transform during any peace period.
A high-stakes bet, yeah.
Let's explore Ukraine's potential strategy, what's being called the porcupine strategy, and this idea of a European coalition.
Right. Sources describe Ukraine's gamble. Use any peace, probably more like a truce, to create conditions where Russia wouldn't dare march on Kiev a second time.
How would they do that? The porcupine part.
It involves a massive, rapid buildup, stockpiling huge amounts of long-range weapons. Think mass-produced drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, enough to deter Russia with a potential torrential downpour of explosive munitions if they ever thought about invading again.
Basically making Ukraine too costly, too painful to attack again.
Exactly. Deterrence through overwhelming defensive and retaliatory power, inflicting unacceptable costs on any aggressor.
And this isn't just Ukraine acting alone, it's linked to a coalition of the willing from Europe.
Intricately linked. The idea involves several thousand European troops physically deployed on Ukrainian soil, acting as a critical tripwire.
A tripwire meaning.
Meaning any Russian attack hitting those European forces would instantly risk invoking NATO collective defense principles, potentially escalating fast, maybe even involving a nuclear umbrella from France.
And speed is key here.
Critical. The bet relies on European forces deploying within weeks. Contrast that with the months Russia might need to reconsolidate for another big offensive. That time difference creates a crucial window.
That speed differential is vital. A strategic race against time during any lull.
Precisely.
And beyond just deterrence, a peace period would be vital for rebuilding and resupplying, possibly leading to a European defense renaissance.
That's the idea. Ukraine could convert its wartime military-industrial complex, which has grown hugely, into a tool for this broader European effort.
How?
They're booming weapons industries, especially in drones. Advanced tech could win lucrative contracts from European allies wanting to boost their own defenses.
A kind of win-win. Europe gets stronger, Ukraine's industry thrives.
Potentially, international investment would boost Ukraine's economy, help reconstruction, and keep domestic suppliers ready for when Ukraine's own military places big orders.
And it would also allow time for training.
Crucially, time to devote personnel and resources to intensive training on advanced Western gear, combat aircraft, sophisticated air defense systems, and to continue building up their military personnel numbers. It's a holistic approach, making Ukraine far more formidable, technologically advanced, and integrated into a European defense structure than it was in 2022.
That paints a picture of a nation really preparing for the long haul.
It does, which brings us to this idea of the waiting game. Ukraine aiming to outlast Putin, leverage potential European shifts.
How does that work?
Build the arsenal, welcome allied forces, and basically try to outlast the 72-year-old dictator, banking on time being on their side. There's speculation, often unstated in Western circles, about Putin's health, the chance of a more moderate or risk-averse leader replacing him.
And banking on Russia's war economy not being sustainable?
That too. The idea that it cannot simply cook itself forever, that this model will inevitably lead to an economic crash. If the Kremlin can't fund the war machine, it doesn't matter who's in charge, the military capacity decreases. It's a gamble on internal Russian dynamics.
A big gamble. And looking even broader, at Europe, Colonel Macgregor makes that really radical prediction. EU and NATO will both go out of existence over the next year.
It's a very radical prediction. He foresees new arrangements emerging, more localized, pragmatic alliances. Maybe Scandinavia plus the Baltic states, Germany plus the Czech Republic, Hungary plus Poland. His argument is that bordering states, the ones with the most direct stake in Ukraine, would form new security pacts. European in origin, not imposed by existing structures he sees as failing. It's a vision of a totally realigned continent.
That would be a seismic shift. Ultimately, this whole scenario, from both sides, Russia's endgame, Ukraine's gamble, it's the ultimate gamble, isn't it?
It really is. A truce, as described here, isn't peace. It's a zero-sum game.
And the penalty for losing.
Catastrophic conquest for Ukraine, loss of sovereignty, effective absorption, or abject geopolitical failure for Russia, a major weakening of its influence. The stakes are terrifyingly high.
It's not peace, as we think of it, just a pause, a strategic breath before maybe an even more intense phase.
Like two chess grandmasters stopping the clock, yeah. But only to reassess, plot their next, maybe decisive, moves.
And it's astounding that despite these huge stakes, the immense costs. Sources conclude both sides think they have good reasons to play the long game. Both believe they can win.
It seems so. For Ukraine, if they get time to fortify, rebuild with European help, they might deter future attacks, protect sovereignty. But a rapid Russian assault before they're ready.
Yeah.
That puts all the pressure on that coalition of the willing to prove reliable fast.
So any truce period becomes this desperate race against time, each side trying to manipulate the pause to their advantage, making the future incredibly uncertain.
Profoundly uncertain.
We've covered a lot of ground there, exploring these multifaceted visions for what might come next in Ukraine, the diplomacy, the military shifts, the high-stakes gambles.
Yeah, whether it's a negotiated settlement, redefining borders, or continued military pressure reordering allegiances, the landscape is shifting dramatically. Under our feet, really.
But here's a final thought, something for you to chew on. If this current international architecture alliances, diplomatic norms, is actually crumbling, like some experts suggest, what does lasting peace even look like? In a multipolar world where old rules don't apply, new alliances are still forming.
What kind of security guarantees can actually hold when the very definition of international order is in flux? When the ground beneath traditional power blocks is cracking? It's a huge question. It goes way beyond Ukraine. Shapes the future for all of us.
And that brings us to the end of this deep dive into what is next for Ukraine. It's incredibly complex, constantly evolving, and we really hope we've given you a clearer, maybe more nuanced understanding of the forces at play and the profound implications.
We're always driven by our AI curiosity to bring you these insights. If you found this deep dive valuable, please do make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Your support really helps us keep these explorations going, distilling the crucial info from all the noise.
You can also consider donating on our GoFundMe page that's linked in the description below to help us keep the deep dive going strong. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Until next time, stay curious and keep diving deep.